Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, live inside of Studio West. Vivek Ramaswamy is running for president. Its second trip to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Good morning, Vivek. Welcome back. Oh, we can't hear you. This is a perennial problem. Now we got you.
Okay.
Welcome back, Vivek.
Good to see you.
I have been listening to you. You gave the first statement on the Trump trial. It was very good from the back of the car. You were the first one. Can you repeat your reaction briefly to the indictment that will be unsealed tomorrow?
Well, look, pending what we see in the indictment when it is unsealed, based on the facts that we do know, Hugh, this appears to be a politicized persecution through prosecution. Alvin Bragg ran for his position on a campaign promise of investigating Donald Trump. I would say that when a prosecutor delivers on a campaign promise to go after a specific individual, especially when that individual is the leader of the opposition party to the ruling party that's in power, that is big trouble for the country. And I just think we're skating on thin ice as a nation right now. Trust in our institutions, including in the police state, is at an all-time low. This takes us to a potential breaking point unless we turn this around. And I say this as somebody who's running. It might be more convenient for candidates like me if Trump were compromised or not even in the race. But this is not how we should decide who runs the country. We should decide who runs the country by putting it to the people of this country who get to decide who we elect to actually run the U.S. government. This is not the way it's supposed to be done.
Now, Vivek Ramaswamy, I like to establish a few foundational subjects when I talk to people about the law. You're not a lawyer. Have you ever been arrested?
I am a lawyer. I went to Yale Law School, but I've never practiced. You're correct about that. I have not been arrested.
Okay, and not even as a kid for goofy stuff?
Not even as a kid. I'll give my parents credit for that. Not even as a kid for goofy stuff. I was a nerdy academic guy. Yeah.
Have you ever been sued in your individual capacity for anything?
I have not.
Have your companies ever been sued?
Not to my knowledge that I can remember. No, actually. It's actually kind of an amazing thing. Yeah.
That is an amazing thing, because my next question was going to be, what did your lawyers advise you to do when your companies got sued? Because anyone who is as successful as you are, and you've been very successful, in fact, would you tell people how you grew your business success? Because you're not a practicing lawyer. So how did you get to your position?
Yeah, so look, I began my career as a biotech investor, did that for 7 years, went to law school at the same time while I kept my job. After that, I went on to found a biotech company. My whole career has been challenging orthodoxies. I challenged the orthodoxy of big pharma by focusing on a lot of disease areas that they had ignored, by incentivizing scientists to actually make money rather than to actually be managerial bureaucrats, which is what they are in big pharma. That was the backbone of building a multi-billion-dollar business. 5 of the drugs I worked on are FDA-approved medicines today, from life-saving therapies in kids to a therapy for prostate cancer. After that, I decided to challenge the cultural orthodoxy in big business by writing Woke Inc., which exposed the politicization of corporate America. And then I went on to found another business to take on the politicization of corporate America called Strive, which competes against BlackRock by offering an alternative vision to the ESG movement. So suffice to say, Hugh, I've built my career and success in business by challenging a lot of those incumbents in that status quo, as I'm trying to do in government now.
But you've avoided the courts through that whole process. I mean, I'm retired from the active practice of law, but for 30 years, I never ran into a company that wasn't sued repeatedly by somebody for something, including Big Pharma must have had their eyes on some of your patents. That you've never had to do any of that. That's truly shocking.
Yeah, I mean, look, Hugh, were there some minor things that I'm not aware of at my level as CEO? Maybe, but really, to tell you the truth, I don't think so. And one of the things I've been built, the businesses that I've run on, is on a culture of really doing everything the right way. Now I'm running for president. I'll be higher profile. I fully expect and am ready for people to shoot arrows wherever they will. But I think that one of the things that's true about my leadership style, whether in business or whether in government, and this relates to even the topic of actually fixing the administrative police state, how to go further than Trump ever did, is if you're doing it on a solid moral foundation, if you're doing it on solid first principles, you can do it uncompromisingly without compromise if you yourself are not compromised. It's actually one of the aspects of my leadership style in business that I intend to bring to the government, because if you're going to do things like I've pledged to do, like reforming the administrative state, shutting down certain administrative agencies, you better believe there's going to be backlash. But doing it on solid, principled footing is what will allow me to see this through, as Reagan did, in fact, but to go further than even Trump did. That's part of the premise of my candidacy.
You know, one of the intriguing things, Vivek, about your candidacy is that you know what the administrative state is, probably because you had to go through the FDA process so many times.
Oh, yeah.
And the administrative state is ubiquitous and it's ominous for our future. But I want to go back to the Trump trial for a moment. And, it's TTD -1, Trump trial day -1. Tomorrow's Trump trial day, and then Wednesday will be TDD +1. Are you going to bring on an advisor to the campaign to interpret for you the events in the criminal trial of Donald Trump?
I will be working with some former law professors of mine who I trust to actually delve through this in detail, because I think there are dimensions to this, Hugh, that are pretty interesting that, I think other candidates may skim the surface on. One of the areas I'm going to be looking for in that indictment when it's unsealed, and by the way, I think there's no excuse for it not to have been unsealed already.
You're right.
But if
You're right.
there's just no excuse for it. It's inexcusable for the country, but it will be unsealed, they say, tomorrow. One of the things I'll be looking for is the nexus between the state law and the federal law. Keep in mind, if these leaks and New York Times reports are to be believed, this is expired under the statute of limitations under New York law and for falsifying business records. And further is at most a misdemeanor. So to charge it as a felony, they have to establish a linkage to a federal campaign finance law violation. That's interesting for a number of reasons. But Hugh, I'm running for president of the United States. One reason it's interesting to me is that may open up the possibility of a presidential pardon in a case where it otherwise would not be open under state law. U.S. presidents cannot pardon people who are convicted under state law. But if that state prosecution is based on a nexus to the federal law, it depends. They say there's 22 counts. That's one of the things I'm going to be scrutinizing very carefully. And Hugh, I will be using advisors, but if you've read some of my work in my books or my scholarship, I've dabbled as a legal scholar in my own right too, and did all right in my capacity before
I have
the business world again. But
I like to tell people, I've been teaching con law for almost 30 years, but I very rarely comment on criminal procedure because while it is a subset of con law, crim pro is crim pro. I had Jerry Israel for crim pro, one of the great geniuses of the 80s, along with Yale Kamazar at Michigan. Did you take crim pro at Yale?
I did not. I took criminal law and constitutional law. I did not take crim pro, which is a great regret of mine.
Well, it's a fascinating court. I've only done one criminal trial, but who's going to be the former Yale faculty member that you referenced? Who's going to help you on this stuff?
I'm going to be respectful of them. I have no problem saying it, but I think that they would prefer to stay behind the limelight as they're advising me with their former professors of mine at Yale, one of whom I actually spoke to yesterday about this very issue that I'm talking to you about here. So if they're fine with it, I'll name them, but out of respect to them, I haven't asked them for that.
Smart. Good answer. Let me turn to Silicon Valley Bank. Predicate question. Did you have any exposure to the SVB collapse?
I did not have any personal exposure that I know of. I have a vast investment portfolio that an independent person manages for me, so I wouldn't be surprised if I did. One of the things I want to do, Hugh, is to take my self-interest out of it, which is unfortunately what most other investors who were commenting on this did not do. One of the most interesting things about the Silicon Valley bailout, it wasn't a bailout of Silicon Valley Bank, but it was a bailout of the Silicon Valley firms that were depositors at Silicon Valley Bank, is that there wasn't a single prominent person who was commenting in favor of that bailout that did not have personal ties to it. And many of the financiers who did not, from Cliff Asness to Ken Griffin, who did not have as meaningful or any of personal ties, were the ones, I think, quite sensibly saying that this should not have been bailed out. So it's amazing how self-interest does filter what business people say. Part of why I've separated myself from that is I want to be speaking on the basis of first principles as someone who's running this country. But to answer your question narrowly, I don't have any exposure that I knew of, but it's independently.
Have you asked your financial advisor yet if you did? Because, for example, Roku, I use that only as an example because it's the obvious one. They had $500 million on deposit at SVB, which means that $499,750,000 was at risk. And so I assume Roku was working the lobbyist chain. You didn't have anything like that kind of exposure to your knowledge, correct?
That's correct. And I think it is a staggering risk failure on behalf of the chief financial officer, even the CEO of Roku, to put that much money in one bank that itself is a smaller bank that's taking this kind of risk. That's rash. It's irresponsible. And the fact that they and others like them were bailed out in the name of helping American small businesses. This is laughable lexicon adopted by Silicon Valley to lobby for this bailout. Really creates this kind of corporate moral hazard, telling these corporations, startup tech firms, that they don't have to look at counterparty risk, don't have to look at risk because the government will be there in their hour of need. I think this was a shameful example of cronyism, what we call historically crony capitalism. I don't even use the word capitalism because there's nothing capitalistic about it. This is a failure of the system, and I think it is a shame that the U.S. government actually came to the rescue of this level of corporate irresponsibility.
Did any of your friends in the Valley, I got text. I've got nothing to do with the Biden administration. They didn't even return my phone call, so there's nothing I can do to help them on this. But I got lobbied to stop complaining about the SVB make good by people I've never met. Did you get any of that? Because you're a high-profile investor?
Countless. I mean, in the weekend before that bailout, it was a part of an influence operation. I was flooded with texts, phone calls. These are with large prospective donors, many of whom. So then I wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal that Sunday, making the case against a bailout, hoping to influence the outcome for the better. Unfortunately, Janet Yellen acted a few hours later. But on the wake of that, I heard from many of them that they were prospective donors that would now be not supporting me because they were disappointed in the posture I took. They were throwing spaghetti against the wall, saying it was going to reduce American competitiveness versus China, knowing that I care about that issue, to saying that, you know what, this was going to create a bank run on Monday in America if Silicon Valley Bank specifically wasn't bailed out. After years of arguing that Silicon Valley Bank should be subject to looser risk standards precisely because they were not a source of systemic risk. So this is hypocrisy. I personally lost large dollar donors over it, but that is okay, Hugh, because I refuse. I'm in this race in part because I refuse to be somebody else's circus monkey. I've put an 8-figure sum of my own wealth into this campaign precisely because I don't want to be somebody else's stooge. But it is clear to me that Silicon Valley is indeed, many of those people believe that they can pull the strings. In some ways,
I want to come back to that in a moment. But you raise donors. Individual donors across 50 states may or may not be a metric for the RNC's hurdle to get onto the debate stage. How is your individual donor pile looking, and is it distributed across 50 states? Do you think you'll be able to meet any of those metrics?
I think we will meet those metrics with flying colors at this point. I can tell you that, which is basically that we have donors from all 50 states, and we actually crossed 15,000 donors just 5 weeks into the campaign. So this is shattering a lot of other norms, even for a new campaign, even for any campaign. And actually, one of the funny facts was about 30% of our donors, at least at the moment we crossed 10,000, we had these numbers, were first-time donors to the GOP. Normally, that number is somewhere in the range of 2 to 5% at most. So we're really shattering norms here. Frankly, Hugh, I think a lot of other candidates, I think I'm going to say this, are going to have, even some of the professional politicians looking at entering this, are going to have trouble hitting tens of thousands of donors. We've already crossed 15,000 5 weeks into this. And so our sense is that will be an important part of the criteria for the debate stage. And at this point, we're confident we're going to meet the debate stage criteria with flying colors.
That's very impressive. For the benefit of the audience who doesn't know, getting individual donors is a lot more difficult than getting mega donors or having personal wealth, which you both have. Let me ask you a couple of SVB questions now. When they argued systemic failure, I was not in a position to say yay or nay because I'm not a banker. I know there was a lot of risk that went uninsured and that there were chief risk officers who were either not at the wheel or asleep. If it had gone down, do you think it would have been systemic bank failure?
No, I do not. And I made a very clear case in the Wall Street Journal why Silicon Valley Bank was different than the other banks. But here's the further point. Even if there were systemic risks to the system, the way to handle that would have been to let Silicon Valley Bank and its depositors suffer the consequences of their decisions while prospectively applying the same set of rules to everybody else to shore up confidence in the banking system. And I laid that out in detail in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere. What the folks in Silicon Valley did was they played a trick. They wanted to purposefully conflate the Silicon Valley Bank situation with the rest of the banking system, because the more likely they could make a bank run on the rest of America, the more likely it was that they could get their bailout. So it was a perverse incentive for them to engage in that kind of fear-mongering. And the irony is the way a bank run starts is through panic. So they had an incentive to create the very fear, to create the appearance of a risk, that otherwise would not have materialized were it not for that fear mongering. I hope that makes sense to you, Hugh, in terms of what I
Oh, it
went
does.
through there.
That's why I got lobbied, because I had a Twitter account and I have a media platform. So they lobbied everybody, they being anyone with risk in SVB who did not want to lose money, lobbied everyone they know. There will be a book written, Vivek Ramaswamy, about those 48 hours, from the time Joe Biden said no bailout to the time that Janet Yellen delivered one. And what you just told me, that you got hammered by major donors, that's part of the background to this.
That is absolutely an essence of the story. You know what? I gave up those donors, but you know what? At the end of the day, it is going to be a bottom-up grassroots uprising. We prefer $1 and $5 donors from thousands. People can go to Vivek2024.com, Vivek 2024.com, to learn more about where I stand. And if it's $1 or $5, what we're building here is a grassroots movement to supplement the major personal investment that I've made in this campaign. And I'm pleased to say,
Vivek, I got to get a few more basic questions in before I run out of time. How much time do I have, Adam? 30 seconds. Ever use drugs?
No.
What did you major in Harvard?
I was biology, molecular biology,
Right.
with the secondary in economics.
And who is your senior campaign strategist?
Rex Elsas and Ben Yoho of the strategy group right here in my backyard in Columbus, Ohio. We're shoulder to shoulder every day.
You told me that last time. They're still there. Good to know that. Vivek, keep coming back. Vivek. I'm getting it right slowly. Vivek2024.com. Thank you, Vivek.
Thank you, Hugh.